Dolly Parton, the eternal heartbeat of American music, the mountain-born miracle who turned sorrow into song and silence into light. From a barefoot girl in the mist of Tennessee's Great Smoky Mountains, raised in a cabin without electricity or plumbing, she built an empire worth more than $650 million, not from privilege, but from pain. The woman who once paid her birth doctor with a sack of cornmeal now owns her own legend, a life that turned hunger into harmony, grief into grace, and hardship into history. She gave us Jolene, and the world felt desire's ache for the first time. She gave us I Will Always Love You, and the world has never stopped feeling. Her fortune is monumental. Over 3,000 songs written and owned by her alone, anthems that outlived decades. Dollywood, her kingdom of joy in her native Tennessee, welcomes millions each year, not just a park, but a monument to endurance, a Brentwood estate bathed in quiet gold, a Nashville house echoing with laughter and lullabies never sung, and a vintage West Hollywood bungalow where silence sometimes sounds louder than applause. In her garage rest relics of the woman she used to be, a 1974 Cadillac DeVille gleaming like an old promise, a 1959 Jaguar whispering forgotten love, a 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air heavy with nostalgia. But this story is not about her riches. It's about the price she paid to earn them. Every dollar carries a scar. Every melody hides a wound. Behind the rhinestones and radiant gowns were nights she collapsed backstage, heart pounding, body trembling, fighting exhaustion no one saw. Behind the applause were prayers whispered through tears, for strength, for peace, for purpose. There were days when fame felt like a burden too heavy to bear, when her smile was a mask stitched over pain. Yet, she never let it slip. Even as illness drained her, even as loneliness crept into her quiet hours, she stood tall, still singing, still giving, still believing that love, in all its brokenness, was worth the fight. And now, as her family gathers before the enormity of what she leaves behind, they see not just the fortune, but the woman who built it with her bare hands and a heart that never stopped giving. A daughter of poverty who gave her people pride. Now, her beloved man, Carl Dean, has passed away. With no children of her own, one question lingers in the hush of her Brentwood home. Who will inherit her $600 million empire? If her music ever carried you through pain, leave a tribute below. Because even a single like is a whispered thank you for the voice that lifted us when we could not stand on our own. Before the rhinestones, before the thunderous ovations and the $600 million legacy, there was only a barefoot child standing in the gray mist of the Great Smoky Mountains, thin as a whisper, small as a prayer. She came into the world on January 19, 1946, in a one-room cabin her father built with his own hands on a steep hillside in Sevier County, Tennessee. The cabin had no electricity, no plumbing, and no heat, just a rusted wood stove that coughed more smoke than warmth. Her parents, Robert Lee and Avie Lee Parton, were so poor they paid the doctor who delivered her with a sack of cornmeal. Dolly Rebecca Parton was the fourth of 12 children, one of 13 mouths to feed on days when there wasn't enough for even one. Her father worked himself raw, hauling rocks, cutting timber, tending fields, anything that traded sweat for a little food. Her mother, barely 35 and already aged by labor and childbirth, sewed by lamplight and sang lullabies over empty pots, hoping melody might fill what hunger could not. The winters in the Smokies were merciless. The wind slipped through the cracks of their walls, and the children clung to one another in a single bed like frightened birds trying to keep warm. Some nights, Dolly once said, my stomach hurt so bad from hunger that songs were the only thing that filled it. Her dresses were pieced together from feed sacks and rags, her shoes held with safety pins. And when the little Pigeon River froze, she washed in water so cold it stole her breath. The Partons didn't understand poverty as a concept. It was the air they breathed, the ache in their bones, the constant visitor who never left. And yet through that bleakness, there was something beautiful. Her mother's voice hummed hymns through the night, and the children, hungry, barefoot but alive, learned to harmonize before they could even read. Then came the heartbreak that silenced even the wind. In 1955, when Dolly was just 9, her baby brother Larry lived only 4 days before his tiny chest stopped rising. We didn't have money for a stone, she remembered softly, just a place in the earth and a prayer we couldn't finish. That small, unmarked grave became the first silence she would spend a lifetime trying to fill. Her father buried his grief in labor, working until his hands bled. Her mother, eyes dimmed by sorrow, sewed until her fingers cracked, patching dresses, patching hearts. And Dolly, too small to name the pain, began to hum to the darkness, as if her voice could keep it from swallowing her whole. But from that ache, something holy began to bloom. Her voice became their roof when storms came, her melodies the only fire that never went out. From the coldest winters and the hunger that shaped her bones came music the world would one day hold close. When she later wrote Coat of Many Colors, it wasn't a song, it was a memory stitched into melody. A mother's love sewn from scraps, a child's courage to wear her poverty with pride. Before she was a legend, she was just a little girl singing to the dark so it wouldn't win. And every dollar she's earned since was built on those nights of hunger, those mornings without shoes, and that tiny grave in Tennessee, where a brother's silence became her first prayer, and a poor mountain girl began turning pain into something eternal. No one could have imagined that a barefoot girl from the misty hollows of Tennessee, whose only stage was the creaking floor of a wooden chapel lit by kerosene lamps, would one day rise to command the world's spotlight, armed with nothing but her voice and the truth buried in her songs. But Dolly Parton's climb was not gilded. It was carved in quiet struggle, in hunger, in nights that smelled of damp wood and fear. She came from a place where dreams were luxuries no one could afford, where the wind through the mountains sang louder than applause. Even as a child, her voice could hush a crowd, make grown men pause mid-sentence, make women cry without knowing why. At 10 years old, she was already leaving home before sunrise, her small body pressed against a guitar, almost her size, following her Uncle Bill Owens on the long, winding road to Nashville. They sang in roadside bars, church basements, and anywhere someone might listen. When the day ended, they slept wherever exhaustion caught them, on cold benches, on studio floors, sometimes in an old car with fogged windows that wouldn't start. Those trips were exciting, hungry, and heartbreaking all at once, Dolly would later say, and those words still ache when you hear them. Because behind every childish smile was a gnawing fear of failing the family who believed in her more than they could feed themselves. In 1964, the morning after she graduated high school, Dolly stood on a dusty Tennessee road with a cardboard suitcase, $20 in her pocket, and no plan except a one-way bus ticket to Nashville. That city glittered from a distance, but up close it was cold, its streets crowded with dreamers and its doors mostly closed. Dolly sang wherever they would let her, often for free meals or tips dropped into a jar. There were nights she went hungry, writing songs just to quiet the ache in her stomach, whispering melodies in rented rooms where cockroaches scurried across the floorboards. Her first contract with Monument Records, instead of saving her, nearly broke her. "You're not country enough," they said. "You're a pop girl." They dressed her voice in sugar she didn't recognize, burying her truth beneath bubblegum melodies. "Happy, happy birthday, baby. What do you think about lovin'?" Each one fading before the ink on the label dried. But Dolly refused to bend. She played smoky bars for handfuls of strangers, her voice fighting to rise above the clinking of beer bottles and laughter that wasn't meant for her. By day, she knocked on doors that never opened. By night, she wrote songs for no one, except the world she hoped would one day listen. "Sometimes," she later recalled, "I'd cry before a show, but I still showed up." She mailed her demo tapes like prayers, thin envelopes of faith stamped with everything she had left. In 1966, one of those prayers was finally heard. She and her uncle wrote "Put It Off Until Tomorrow" for Bill Phillips, and when that song climbed the charts, a single question rippled across Nashville. "Who is Dolly Parton?" A year later, she answered with, "Hello, I'm Dolly." Those songs weren't fantasies. They were cut from the fabric of her own hunger, her own loneliness, her own fight to survive. Yet even then, the world tried to shrink her brilliance, calling her just another girl singer, an accessory to someone else's success. But they never saw the steel beneath the sequins, the defiance behind that honeyed smile. Dolly was not built to follow. She was born to lead, to shatter every mold they tried to cast her in. And from that quiet rebellion came the song that would define her soul. Written not in glitter, but in goodbye, "I will always love you." When she sang it, the world stopped, not to cheer, but to listen, to the sound of a woman who had turned every rejection, every hungry night, every silent prayer into something eternal. Dolly Parton didn't just rise from poverty, she rebuilt it into a kingdom, brick by trembling brick, forged from every rejection she endured, every heartbreak she buried, and every sleepless night spent chasing a dream too fragile for the world to see. There were nights, she later confessed, when she'd sing to keep from crying, whispering melodies to the dark so the silence wouldn't win. Behind the shimmer of rhinestones and the stage lights that never seemed to dim, she was quietly building an empire, not from privilege, but from perseverance, purpose, and a refusal to disappear. The girl who once shared a bed with a dozen siblings now owned the world's stage, transforming hunger into harmony and loss into light. Today, that empire stands at over $650 million, not merely a fortune, but a living monument to a woman who turned pain into poetry and silence into legacy. Her breakthrough came in 1973 with Jolene, a stripped-down storm of longing that didn't just play on radios, it pierced through them like lightning. Covered by hundreds of artists across generations, it still earns royalties to this day. Yet if Jolene opened the door, it was "I Will Always Love You" that burned it wide open, a farewell so raw, so achingly human, it became eternal. Written for her mentor, Porter Wagoner, and later reborn through Whitney Houston's voice in The Bodyguard, it became the best-selling single by a female artist in history. That one song alone has earned over $40 million, and Dolly owns it outright. She once said, "I knew that if I gave away my songs, I'd be giving away my soul." And so she never did. Unlike so many artists who signed away their futures for fleeting fame, Dolly kept her voice. All 3,000 songs, written, owned, and protected. That catalog, now valued at $150 million, still brings in $6 to $8 million a year, a steady hum of gratitude from a world she once sang to in hunger. Her fortune wasn't built on glamour. It was carved from grief and grace, from stories that healed others because they were born from wounds of her own. But her brilliance never stopped at music. In 1986, when others saw a dying amusement park in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, she saw resurrection. "I wanted to build a place where my people could dream," she said. And so Dollywood was born. Today, it stands as the largest ticketed attraction in Tennessee, welcoming more than 3 million visitors each year. Dolly owns 50% of the company, a living world of laughter, roller coasters, theaters, and the warmth of Appalachian spirit, bringing in tens of millions annually. It's not just a business. It's her heart, rebuilt into joy. Her empire didn't sprout from luck. It grew from faith and fierce love for her roots. Her homes are more than mansions. They are quiet sanctuaries of remembrance. The Brentwood estate she bought for $400,000 decades ago now glows with the weight of years, worth millions. Her Nashville home still hums with echoes of laughter and late-night songs. Her West Hollywood bungalow, once her haven of solitude, now stands as a monument to endurance. Even her cars, a 1974 Cadillac DeVille, a 1959 Jaguar XK150, a 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air, are more than chrome and steel. They are ghosts of the road she traveled, reminders of the barefoot girl who sang to the mountains for warmth and mercy. Through every triumph, Dolly never bent to fame. She shaped it. She gave as fiercely as she created, donating hundreds of millions to children's literacy, wildfire victims, and global vaccine research. And now, with her beloved husband Carl Dean gone and no children of her own, a question drifts softly across the Tennessee hills. Who will inherit an empire stitched with soul? Because this was never just about wealth. It's about a legacy written in hymns and heartbreak, in grace and grit, in the stubborn belief that love can build anything from nothing. For those who remember how it began, with a sack of cornmeal to pay the doctor who brought her into the world, the sheer magnitude of what she's built feels almost sacred. She was born with nothing and gave the world everything. Her fortune may one day change hands, but her true inheritance, the courage to begin with nothing, will outlive every dollar she ever made. For all the sparkle, the gold records, and the towering legacy that Dolly Parton built over 6 tireless decades, there has always been a shadow stitched into the seams of her light, an invisible thread of sorrow no spotlight could ever wash away. Because behind every roar of applause was a quiet scar, and the very first of those scars cut deep before she even knew what fame was. It was 1955. Dolly was just 9 years old, living in a crowded 2-room cabin in Locust Ridge, Tennessee. When heartbreak came to stay, her baby brother Larry, born too small and too soon, lived only 4 days before his fragile heart fell silent. There was no time for mourning, no money for flowers, not even a stone to mark his name, just a patch of earth and a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. Their home had no electricity, no plumbing, no distractions, only the stillness of grief and the echo of a cry that would never come again. Dolly would later whisper in interviews that grief in her family was never spoken, it just soaked into the wood. Her mother, A.V. Lee, worn down by 12 births and endless days of tending, carried that pain like a hidden prayer, sowing through tears she wouldn't let her children see. Her father, Robert Lee, turned his anguish into labor, hauling stone, mending fences, doing anything to bury the ache beneath work. And little Dolly, she didn't cry out. She watched, she learned, and she listened to the silence. She saw how sorrow could bend a person but not break them, how love could exist even after breath was gone. "We didn't have the words for grief," she once said, "so we just sang through it." That loss, the kind that makes no sound but never leaves, became part of her bones. It wove itself through her melodies, through every trembling lyric that would one day heal the hearts of strangers. It became the haunting pulse behind songs like "Coat of Many Colors" and "In the Good Old Days When Times Were Bad." Songs that didn't just recall the past, but bled it, trembling with a truth only a child who has known loss could ever write. It was her first real encounter with the permanence of goodbye, the cruelest kind of farewell, delivered not in anger or distance, but in absence. That tiny, unmarked grave behind the house was her first teacher, her first understanding that love and loss are two sides of the same song. And though the world would one day see her bathed in light, her name etched in gold, her laughter filling arenas, there has always been a quiet corner of her soul that never left that mountain cabin, a place where her brother never got to laugh, never got to grow, never even got to say hello. And to this day, if you listen closely between the verses of her songs, you can still hear him there, in the pauses, in the hush before the chorus, a silence that hums like memory, and a love that never had the chance to end. If Dolly Parton's music has a soul, that soul was her mother, Avie Lee, the quiet architect of her strength, the gentle fire that kept her spirit burning, the heartbeat hidden beneath every lyric she ever wrote. To the world, Avie was just a mountain mother raising 12 children in poverty. But to Dolly, she was the center of gravity, her first song, her first prayer, her reason to believe. It was Avie who taught her that love wasn't something you said, but something you did, with worn hands, sleepless nights, and faith that refused to bend. So when Avie Lee passed away in 2003, Dolly didn't just lose her mother, she lost the rhythm of her world, the quiet pulse that had always steadied her, no matter how loud the applause or how blinding the fame. "Mama was the music in my bones," Dolly once said. When she left, part of the song went with her. Avie had always been the weaver of cloth, of courage, of life itself. It was she who sewed the coat of many colors, stitching it from rags and remnants, but weaving in something far greater, pride, dignity, and defiance in the face of a world that often gave them nothing. That coat became more than clothing. It was armor for a little girl who had to walk through poverty with her head held high. The song it inspired would one day touch millions, becoming one of the most beloved anthems in the history of country music. Yet, after her mother's death, Dolly quietly confessed a truth that broke hearts everywhere. She could no longer sing it. "Every time I try," she said, "the words just turn to tears." The melody fractured under the weight of memory. The lyrics became too heavy to carry. The song that once celebrated her mother's love now carried her absence. And that was a pain too sacred for performance. Unlike those who mourn before cameras, Dolly grieved in silence. She folded her sorrow inward, letting the stillness speak where words failed. For this loss wasn't for the world. It was private, personal, almost holy. Her mother had raised 12 children in the harsh hills of Tennessee with little more than prayer and unbreakable will. She gave Dolly everything that couldn't be bought. Faith, grit, generosity, and the courage to sing through tears when silence might have been easier. In the years that followed, Dolly often spoke softly of her mother appearing in dreams, her presence gentle as the scent of lilacs in the night. "Sometimes," she said, "I still hear her humming, and for a moment, I'm home again." And though Dolly has since filled arenas, built an empire worth hundreds of millions, and lifted millions of souls with her music, there remains one song that still folds her to her knees: "Coat of Many Colors." For the world, it's a hymn of hope and triumph, but for Dolly, it's something far more fragile: a whispered goodbye, a trembling thank you stitched in melody. When she sings it now, she isn't performing. She's praying. The audience may hear legacy and love, but Dolly, she hears her mother's voice, soft as a lullaby, strong as the Tennessee hills, wrapping around her heart like a memory that will never fade. Among all the voices that ever wove through Dolly Parton's life, none resonated as deeply, as tenderly as that of her brother Floyd, her confidant, her creative twin, the one who understood the rhythm of her heart long before the world ever heard her voice. He wasn't just family, he was the quiet echo that finished her sentences in song, the harmony that never needed to be rehearsed. Together, they built melodies out of thin air, side by side on small stages and in late-night writing sessions that stretched into dawn. They co-wrote verses that would become the hidden pillars of Dolly's musical empire. It was Floyd who stood beside her, not as a fan, but as a mirror, reflecting the purest part of her artistry back to her. And then, in December 2018, the music faltered. That sacred harmony between them, one that had whispered through 6 decades of songs, fell silent when Floyd Parton passed away at the age of 61, taking with him a part of Dolly's creative soul that could never be replaced. This loss was unlike any she had faced before. It didn't arrive as thunder. It settled like fog, quiet but inescapable, wrapping itself around everything she touched. Floyd wasn't just her brother. He was the living thread between who she had been and who she became. Their most beloved creation, Rockin' Years, had climbed to #1 in 1991, but it wasn't success that made it special. It was that it carried both their hearts in perfect unison. His fingerprints were everywhere in her catalog, subtle, uncredited, yet unmistakable. The quiet architect behind countless songs that gave Dolly her sound. To lose him was to lose a part of that sound itself. "He was my steady," she once told a friend, "the one who understood me before I even spoke." And when he was gone, there was a silence even her music couldn't fill. True to her nature, Dolly spoke almost nothing of it to the public. There were no televised tributes, no tearful interviews, just one small, handwritten family statement and a private funeral. No cameras, no crowds, only kin, memory, and music. It was there, among the people who had known the truth of their bond, that Rockin' Years was sung one last time. Not for charts or applause, but as a trembling farewell. Voices cracked, hands shook, and even the melody seemed to grieve. Those close to her would later whisper that after the funeral, the silence in Dolly's world was unbearable. She returned to her work, as she always had, but this time something was missing, a note she could no longer find. Floyd had been her anchor in the whirlwind of fame, her reminder of home in a world that never stopped moving. And though she had turned countless heartbreaks into songs, this one was different. This one was too near, too raw, too much a part of her own heartbeat. Because some losses defy melody. They refuse to be written or rhymed. They become the silence between notes, the breath caught in the throat before the chorus begins. Floyd's passing reminded the world that even legends break, that even icons, bathed in light, carry shadows that never fade. And for Dolly, the world's eternal songbird, his absence became her quiet refrain. A song that no one will ever hear, but one she will keep humming in her heart for the rest of her days. Some wounds run so deep, they cannot be turned into songs. They live beyond melody, beyond rhyme, in a silence too sacred for even a songwriter to touch. For Dolly Parton, the loss of her beloved niece, Teva, was one of those heartbreaks, the kind that doesn't wail but weighs, sitting like a stone on the heart, pressing between breaths. Teva was only 36, an age still trembling with promise, standing on the fragile edge of possibility. She was young enough to begin again, to rewrite her story, to find light after struggle. But that second chance never came. Her passing happened quietly, away from cameras and crowds, in a corner of life where even Dolly's light could not reach. And for the woman who had turned every tragedy into song, this one was different. There were no verses to carry it, no chorus to contain it, just a stillness too heavy to sing through. Those close to her say this loss struck Dolly harder than almost any before. Because Teva hadn't merely faltered, she had fought. She had wrestled with life itself. Addiction, custody battles, the weight of her own storms. And through it all, Dolly stood by her side, not as a star, but as an aunt, a woman who loved fiercely and refused to look away. She didn't just offer comfort, she acted. Quietly, without headlines or applause, she paid $25,000 for Teva's rehab, an act of love, not charity. "You do whatever you can," Dolly once whispered, "but sometimes it still isn't enough." And that's what haunts her still, the unbearable truth that all the money, all the fame, all the prayers in the world cannot save every soul you love. There was no tribute concert, no interview, no song written in her memory. Only a short obituary, a few trembling words on paper, and an ache that still echoes in the spaces between Dolly's laughter and her silence. For a woman who has spent her life healing others with melody, this grief had no harmony. Teva's name may never headline a stage, but to Dolly, it remains etched in the tenderest part of her heart. The part that still hopes, still hurts, still wonders what could have been. "She was just 36, Dolly once murmured, her voice barely a breath. "Too young to be gone. Too loved to be forgotten." And that's the cruel poetry of it. Sometimes the deepest sorrow doesn't come from a song, but from the silence that follows. Because even legends, with all their grace and glory, must still kneel before the unchangeable truth of fate. That love, no matter how boundless, cannot always rewrite the ending. For all the love songs Dolly Parton has ever written, ballads of heartbreak and healing, of dreams rising from ashes, there is one song she never sang, because it belonged to a life she never got to live, the song of motherhood. It lived only inside her, soft as a breath, fragile as dawn, a lullaby without lyrics, a cradle without a child. When she married Carl Dean in 1966, she dreamed not of arenas or applause, but of a quiet Tennessee house filled with giggles and bedtime prayers. She used to picture little hands tugging at her skirt while she stirred cornbread, the smell of supper in the air, toys scattered like confetti near the door. "I thought my life would be full of children," she once said, smiling through a shadow that never left her eyes. "That's what I dreamed of most." And in that dream, she even imagined a legacy built not of records or rhinestones, but of tiny footsteps carrying her name forward long after she was gone. But fame is a loud thing, and sometimes its echo drowns out the softest dreams. The brighter the lights burned, the more her private hopes receded into the background, like a note fading before it finds harmony. Then came 1982, a year she would remember, not for triumphs, but for silence. An illness no one saw coming, endless doctor visits, and finally the surgery that closed a door forever. Endometriosis, they told her, a word that changed more than her body. It changed the future she had imagined. When she stepped out of that hospital, the sun was blinding, almost cruel. She later remembered standing on the curb, feeling the weight of the air, knowing something inside her had gone quiet for good. "I walked out of there," she said, "but I didn't walk out the same woman." That night, the woman whose laughter could lift a stadium sat in a darkened room, staring at the wall where a nursery might have been. No sound, no prayer, just the slow ache of what would never be, and the dawning realization that her family name would have no child to carry it on. Years later, she spoke openly about that season of her life. Not with despair, but with courage. She admitted that there were days when the pain felt unbearable, when the silence in her home grew too heavy, but she chose to rise again. She sought healing through her faith, her music, and the people who loved her most. "Some things you never stop missing," she said once, her voice trembling like the edge of a song. And though she built an empire worth hundreds of millions, she knew that no deed, no will, no fortune could ever pass to a child of her own, that her legacy would have to live differently. And yet, as always, Dolly transformed her sorrow into something holy. She poured that mother's love into raising her siblings, and later into millions of children she'd never meet through her imagination library. Over 200 million books now carry her name, each one a tiny echo of the love she never got to give in person. "Maybe God had other plans," she said softly. "Maybe I was meant to mother the world." But even in that surrender, the ache remains, a soft, haunting chord that never resolves. Because love like that doesn't vanish. It waits, suspended in time. And sometimes when she sings, when the lights fade and the applause dies, she looks up into the dark beyond the stage. For just a moment, you can see it in her eyes, the quiet question that has lived there for decades. What would her voice sound like saying, "Mama"? Not all heartbreaks are loud. Some are whispers that echo through the years, woven into the silence between songs. And Dolly? She carries that whisper still, gently, bravely, every single day of her life. A melody without words. A lullaby never sung. A legacy built from love that found another way to live. The 1980s were meant to be Dolly Parton's golden decade. A time when her voice conquered the airwaves, her films filled theaters, and her brilliance seemed untouchable, divine. To the world, she was pure radiance, the rhinestone goddess who could make the hardest hearts melt with a smile. But behind that shimmering light was a woman unraveling, not in public, but in silence, behind the very glow that made her unforgettable. While the crowds rose to their feet, the woman they adored was quietly falling apart, her laughter fading into long, sleepless nights. The spotlight that once felt warm had become blinding. The applause that once healed her now echoed hollow in the dark. She had everything: fame, fortune, and the love of millions. But inside, she felt the quiet ache of emptiness growing like a shadow she couldn't outrun. "I woke up every day feeling like I wasn't alive," she would later recall, her words trembling with memory. The weight of success, The exhaustion of giving everything she had to everyone else left her with nothing for herself. Then came what she called an affair of the heart, a deep emotional entanglement that tore at her spirit more than any headline could. It wasn't scandal, it was sorrow, the kind of heartbreak that steals your reflection, that makes even your own voice sound like a stranger's. On top of that came relentless health struggles, family strain, and the crushing expectation to always be Dolly, flawless, tireless, unbreakable. Slowly, the woman who had given light to millions began to flicker. She cancelled tours, stopped writing, withdrew from friends, not out of rebellion, but out of exhaustion. Her world shrank to the size of her own room. Colors dulled, music stopped. The silence became a weight too heavy to carry. In that stillness, she began to drift toward a kind of despair, too deep to name. The woman whose laughter could fill a stadium found herself lying in bed for days, motionless, staring at the ceiling as if it were the only thing left that could understand her silence. Her body gave in, her spirit dimmed, and her mind whispered what her heart feared. Was this all there was left? Then, in the quietest moment of her darkest night, came a sound, small, unexpected, and divine. The gentle tapping of tiny paws on the floor. Her dog, Popeye, had come searching for her, sensing what even those closest to her could not see. That small creature, warm and alive, broke through the fog. Dolly fell to the floor, clutching him, tears flooding from a place beyond words. "He was my angel," she would later say, calling him her spiritual messenger. That night, she didn't just cry, she chose to live again. From that moment on, she sought help. She leaned on her faith, her music, and her family, piecing herself back together, one prayer, one song, one sunrise at a time. She poured her pain into melodies that spoke to the broken-hearted, because now she understood them more than ever. And though she rose again, stronger and wiser, the shadows of that season never left her completely. They followed softly, whispering reminders of how close she once came to losing herself. But maybe that's what made her light so extraordinary afterward. It wasn't perfect, it was earned. Because the truth about Dolly Parton isn't just that she shined brighter than anyone else, it's that she did so after nearly being extinguished. She carried her darkness, not as shame, but as proof of her humanity. The world saw glamour, but what they were really witnessing was grace, the quiet, invisible courage of a woman who broke, healed, and kept singing anyway. And that's why her story endures. Because even the most radiant smiles, the ones that light up nations, are often stitched together by storms no one ever sees. Dolly Parton's greatest legacy isn't her fame or her fortune. It's the reminder that even the strongest souls can fall apart and still rise again, shining not in spite of their scars, but because of them. For over half a century, Carl Dean was not just Dolly Parton's husband. He was her refuge, the still point in a world that never stopped spinning, the quiet heartbeat beneath the roar of applause. When the lights went down and the crowd faded into darkness, it was Carl's steady voice waiting for her in the silence, the one place where she could breathe without pretending to shine. He loved her before the world did, before the sequins, before the empire, before Dolly Parton became a legend. To him, she was just the girl he met at the wishy-washy laundromat in 1964. Hair too big, dreams even bigger, carrying more hope than she could hold. To millions, she was a goddess of song, but to Carl, she was simply home. And in 2025, at 82, that home fell quiet. Carl Dean, The man who never once sought fame, who lived in the shade of her brilliance but was the light that guided her through it, slipped away in the hush of their Nashville home. No sirens, no headlines, no spectacle. Just stillness, just love dissolving into air. The news didn't break, it drifted, soft as Tennessee wind through the pines, carried in whispers heavy with disbelief. Inside the house, time stopped. The air hung thick, like it was afraid to move without him in it. His coffee cup still sat by the sink. His boots waited by the door. For 58 years, they had been two halves of the same song. And now, only one melody remained. "It's strange," Dolly said later, voice trembling in a rare interview, "how the world can still be so loud when your own world has gone quiet." For the woman who had turned sorrow into symphonies her entire life, this silence was different. It was sacred. It was the kind that pressed against the chest and refused to let go. She withdrew not from fame, but from the noise. Because some losses are too private for an audience. Some heartbreaks are not meant to be performed. They're meant to be survived. When the time came to say goodbye, Dolly planned every detail with trembling hands and a heart cracked open by devotion. No cameras, no reporters, no flashing lights, just a small white chapel nestled on their property, the one Carl used to slip into when the world became too heavy for her. She filled it with wildflowers he once picked from the garden, their scent mingling with candle smoke, and the faint perfume of old photographs laid gently along the pews. Each picture told a love story, fame never touched, sunlit porches, worn denim, quiet laughter. When she stood before his casket, she didn't see a crowd. She saw him, only him. Her voice was a whisper wrapped in tremor. "Thank you," she said, barely audible, "for loving me when I was just me." Then, slowly, she unfolded a letter, creased, yellowed, soft from time. Carl had written it decades earlier, and she had kept it close, reading it whenever the road got too long. "You were always my shining star," it said, "but I never needed the world to know, just you." The room fell still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Dolly reached for her old guitar, the one that had carried her through hunger, through heartbreak, through every storm, and began to play. A song no one had ever heard, not meant for the charts, not made for applause, made only for him. Her fingers trembled, her voice cracked, then rose again, breaking and healing in the same breath. Every note was a memory, every chord a heartbeat. By the final line, her words dissolved into sobs, and the legend the world thought unbreakable finally broke. Alone, on her knees, before the man who had quietly held her heart for a lifetime. That was not a performance. It was a surrender, a requiem of love and loss. The woman who had survived poverty, illness, and loneliness, who had built an empire from dust and dreams, was undone by something no stage could hold: love that refused to die. Carl's passing wasn't just the loss of a husband. It was the collapse of the only world where Dolly Parton wasn't Dolly Parton. In that chapel, she wasn't a star. She was a woman stripped bare, whispering goodbye to the one soul who saw her before the rhinestones and after the curtain closed. But even in her devastation, she found grace in the silence. Because love like theirs never ends. It simply changes form. It lingers in the air, in the spaces between breaths, in the songs she still sings when the lights fade and the crowd disappears. Carl Dean may be gone, but his love remains her final, unwritten ballad, an invisible melody that doesn't live on vinyl, but in eternity. A love that never needed witnesses, never asked for applause, and yet even now, in its quiet absence, it still echoes, always. Now, at 78, Dolly Parton stands at the summit of a life most could only dream of, surrounded by a fortune that has outlived empires, her name etched into the soul of American music, her legend carved in gold and grace. Yet within the vast quiet of her Brentwood estate, sprawling gardens, red-tiled roofs, rose-draped porches, there is a stillness so profound it feels alive. The air carries the hum of memory, not laughter. The light falls softly on photographs, not faces. What was once a home, filled with late-night whispers and gentle laughter, has become a sanctuary of silence, a museum of love that time dared not disturb. This mansion, grand and perfect, is now more heart than house. Its walls echo with the voice of one man who will never answer again. Carl Dean's spirit still lingers in every corner. His boots remain by the door, untouched. His favorite chair still faces the window that overlooks the Oaks, the same view he once admired at dawn while Dolly brewed his coffee. "I can't move it," she once admitted quietly, "because it still feels like he's sitting there." The tiny chapel he built for her, hidden beneath the trees, is now her refuge. She walks there alone at sunrise, gravel crunching beneath her feet, sometimes humming softly, not for the world, not for fame, but for him. Those who know her say she speaks to him there, as if the wind itself were her confessional. "Some days," she once whispered to a friend, "I still catch myself turning to tell him something. Then I remember." She wakes early, always has, a rhythm born from decades of discipline and loss. Her mornings begin in the same small kitchen where she used to fry eggs for two, the same wooden table where their hands once met over quiet breakfasts. Now there is only one plate, one cup, one sound, the creak of memory in the stillness. And though she has no children to fill these rooms with laughter, she has filled the world beyond these walls with her mother's heart. Through her imagination library, more than 200 million books have reached tiny hands that will never know how much she longed for children of her own. Her godchildren, especially Miley Cyrus, speak of her as both star and mother, a beacon wrapped in sequins and kindness. Yet even that legacy, even that love, cannot quiet the ache of coming home to a silence that does not speak back. One night she confessed softly, "If I could trade every diamond for just one more day with him, I would." And you believe her, because her diamonds have never truly glittered without him. Her $650 million empire, the songs, the theme parks, the royalties, the homes, stands as a monument, not to fame, but to endurance. Yet, when the Tennessee sun sinks low and paints the hills in gold, all that wealth fades into the background. The wind moves through the porch swing, slow and tender, as if rocking invisible memories. And there, barefoot on the wooden boards, Dolly sits, not as an icon, not as a legend, but as a woman who once loved one man so completely that the world itself became a quieter place without him. She still works, still creates, still gives. Dollywood roars with joy. Her music still spins across generations. Her name is immortal. But when the night comes, when applause fades and the stars climb above the Tennessee hills, the legend disappears, and what remains is simply Dolly, a woman humming to the dark, whispering to the man who once called her his girl, clinging not to fame, but to faith. Her life may glitter with legacy, but it is stitched forever with longing. The kind of longing that no spotlight can illuminate, too sacred for applause, too eternal for any song to contain. Dolly Parton was never just a singer. Never merely a celebrity, over nearly 7 decades, she became something sacred, a quiet constant in a changing world, a living symbol of light, love, and human resilience. She rose from dirt floors and river baths, from a one-room cabin wrapped in Appalachian mist, where dreams were whispered into the dark because the night was too cold to sleep. From those roots, she grew into a global emblem of grace. Grace in rising, grace in giving, and grace in never forgetting the road that raised her. Her voice didn't just echo through radios, it reached the unseen corners of people's lives. She didn't sing at the world, she sang for it, with it, instead of it, carrying the broken-hearted, the proud, and the poor in every trembling note. Her songs didn't just chart emotions, they healed them. Her words didn't just inspire, they rescued. And her kindness, that unshakable kindness, became a form of quiet rebellion in a world that too often forgets softness. Her philanthropy didn't chase headlines, it built hope. Each act of giving, each lyric of forgiveness, each story of faith turned her from an artist into an anchor for the weary, a voice for the voiceless, and a mirror for those who had forgotten their worth. Now, at 78, she stands at the summit of everything she once thought impossible. Her name etched into the very heart of American culture. Her legacy sprawling, like the Tennessee hills that birthed her. Dollywood thrives as both empire and embrace, giving joy and work to the very mountains that once held her barefoot dreams. Her imagination library, once a small-town promise, has now placed over 200 million books into tiny hands around the world. Not to impress, but to ignite the one inheritance she believes every child deserves: imagination. And through her music, songs of loss, faith, laughter, and redemption, she built something no empire could match: a map for the human soul, a guide for finding light again after everything has gone dark. Her life is proof that generosity can be an art form, that love can be an economy, and that humility, when practiced long enough, becomes holy. But even legends know that the spotlight dims. In her quietest hours, behind the golden gates of her Brentwood estate, Dolly has begun to prepare, not for farewell, but for continuity. Friends close to her say she has written her final wishes with the same care and poetry she gave to Jolene, and I will always love you. It isn't fear that drives her planning. It's love. Love for those left behind. Love for the causes that shaped her. Love for a world she wants to keep shining even when she's gone. With no children of her own, she has already chosen who will carry her light forward. Her godchildren, nieces, nephews, and the millions of children who have found comfort in her songs or strength in her story. Because Dolly's true fortune isn't her $650 million empire, it's her values: to give more than you take, to dream bigger than your pain, to never let glitter hide the truth. Her estate is not an ending, it's an engine designed to outlive her voice. It will continue to fund literacy, music education, healthcare, and the preservation of Appalachian heritage, the same soil that shaped her spirit. And one day, when the lights dim and the encore fades, her name will not simply echo from vinyl or film. It will hum softly in the laughter of a child opening their first book, in the quiet strength of a mother who finds courage in her lyrics, in the eyes of anyone who ever needed someone to remind them, "You are enough." That is her final masterpiece, a legacy not cast in marble or gold, but written on hearts, soft yet unbreakable, enduring yet unseen. Dolly Parton's final song will never end. It will live on, humming through generations, steady and eternal, even after the stage falls silent.